Hello everyone, today I wanna talk about my vision on the combat update. A couple of days ago, Chip has posted a custom Java Edition snapshot with a prototype of new combat mechanics. Yeah, I like it. I really like it. There is nothing I would ask to remove from this snapshot, but there is a thing that is missing. More weapons and armor. I mean, we have only two melee weapons, only two ranged weapons, and to be fair, both are way more useful than crossbows in survival, and practically only one type of armor in survival. Of course, in minigames you could be granted with more chunky armor, but Minecraft doesn't have an element of choice when it comes to the armor. There is a straight line from the worst to the best. This is the survival armor set you'll get after a couple of days of a playthrough, and you will almost never change it for anything else. But if you add new weapons, you want all of them to be actually useful, right? Yes, that's why we should take a look at the real medieval weapons and armor, but not for the sake of making the game historically accurate, but because if real life had such a variety of weapons, there was a use for each of them. Let's start with the sword and the full plate armor. Good as it is, keep it as it is, they fulfill the same role in the medieval period as in this game, with the one exception. Real-life swords are not effective against armor, but this is where gameplay balance should be above the realism. In-game armor should decrease the incoming damage, but not negate it completely, as it is right now. So, if swords are not very effective against armor, what people used against armor? They used the blunt weapons, like maces. Yeah, maces are very good against armor, because armor neutralizes the sword's cutting ability, but blunt damage goes through the armor to its destination. Of course, some striking force is going to be absorbed by the armor, but the mace have way more striking force than a sword. But as a drawback, the point of balance of a mace is far off from the user in comparison to a sword, and that makes it harder to use. Mace feels like it's a heavier weapon, even if it isn't, and that's why an in-game mace would have a longer cooldown time. I think maces should have slightly less damage than swords, because while both of them are very lethal, it's more likely to survive a blunt strike to the arm because you don't bleed all over the place. So, an in-game mace should have the armor piercing, a slightly less damage, and a longer cooldown. Next we have the axe. It's kinda between a sword and a mace because it has some cutting capability, but not as much as a sword, and it has some blunt force, but not as much as a mace. But its main advantage is that you use it to chop wood. Usually, you have to have an axe on your hotbar anyway, and using it as your main weapon means you have one extra slot for something else. And that's why I think this weapon can be just slightly worse than dedicated weapons like swords and maces. So, I think an in-game axe should have the lesser armor piercing, the same damage as the sword, and longer cooldown. You know, I use the term the blunt damage in this video, but I don't think the game has to actually have mechanics of blunt damage, cutting, thrusting, etc. It will just overcomplicate everything. What I suggest is to think logically how that would affect things like armor piercing, attack cooldowns, etc. And instead of having mace as a blunt weapon in a code, make it like mace deals that much piercing damage. But what if you want to protect yourself specifically from the blunt damage? The real life has an answer. The padded armor. Gambeson. Actually, Gambesons were pretty good against cutting weapons as well, but for the sake of balance, I think the Gambeson should be equal to the iron armor, but it should negate the extra armor piercing from maces and axes. And I think it would be balanced because you would have to grow the flags. Yes, I suggest to add one more crop to the game, but this time it will actually have a use. And with Gambesons, people will have a real choice between diamond armor, which is more expensive and more vulnerable to the blunt damage, and a Gambeson, which is cheaper but requires its own material to make, and which is better against maces and axes. Ah, I have almost forgot about the trident. While a trident from that combat snapshot has a longer reach, it has way less damage and attack speed than a sword. That should be, in theory, negated by the fact that you can throw it once. No, that's not worth it. But the main problem with a trident is that you can't enchant it with sharpness. It's useless. Impaling enchant works only underwater. I can think of only one scenario when trident is the better pick. When you have to fight guardians. In air, a trident deals way less damage than a sword or a bow, and underwater, there is nobody to fight with. Drowns are just too slow to catch up, and even if they do, they are melee. You can just use a sword. What I would suggest to do is to make it have the same damage as a sword, allow players to enchant it with sharpness, and don't allow players to throw a trident unless it's enchanted with loyalty. Nobody will actually throw a trident knowing that it's not coming back. However, making it having a longer range and a longer cooldown like it is in a snapshot makes total sense. Now is the time for me to be a good YouTuber and throw the like and subscribe goals at you. I have a let's play with farms and piston balls and stuff, and sometimes I make videos like this one. Next we have the staff, a long-range blunt weapon made of bamboo and iron ingot. The reason to have them in this game is that tridents are quite rare, but it would be nice to have a long-range melee weapon that also have the lesser armor piercing because it's a blunt weapon. But of course, this weapon deals far less damage than any proper weapon, but it could be a good starting option, especially if you want a bigger range. I was thinking about having a spear or a polearm, but a trident can fulfill that role quite well, and having no spears in this game makes more reasons to get a trident, even if you're not sold on having both melee and range in one weapon. Speaking of ranged weapons, I suggest to add pistols and muskets. Hold on, I know what you're saying, but firearms weren't a thing in the medieval period. Yeah, you're right, well, sort of, but the game already has gunpowder and TNT. Our character knows how to use the gunpowder. That's why I say that having Renaissance firearms like single-shot pistols and muskets would not break the lore of the game. The idea is that they should be extremely devastating, very precise on a long distance, but it should take forever to reload, and its ammunition should be quite expensive. Let's say you can craft 5 paper cartridges out of an iron ingot, a piece of gunpowder, and 2 pieces of paper. It's quite expensive, especially in the early game, but in the late game, where iron can be farmed and arrows are just a dirt cheap byproduct of a skeleton farm, having something more deadly than arrows would be very welcomed. Another property of firearms is that they have 75 and 100% of the armor piercing. Muskets completely ignores any armor, and that's why we had no soldiers wearing armor in World War One. But again, to balance things out, it should take like 5 and 7 seconds respectively to reload. Maybe you could preload your guns, but having more guns would take more slots in your inventory, which again balances things out. So yeah, these are my suggestions to the weaponry of this game. I was thinking about weapons like a katana or a hammer or a dagger, but having too many weapons in the game would just overcomplicate it. And those weapons don't really have their own unique roles that cannot be fulfilled with something from today's list. So, if you have enjoyed this video, look away from the shiny screen. The eye doctors. The eye doctors said that you have to give your eyes a rest from screens every hour or so. Bye bye.